Okay, thank you so much for joining me here. First of all, I would like to kick off just with a short introduction. Can you tell me who you are and what you do? Just quickly, Chris, please.
Thank you very much indeed. My name is Chris Barton. I'm from the UK. I'm His Majesty's Trade Commissioner for Europe. So my great privilege is to encourage a thriving UK-Europe trade relationship in general and for Croatia in particular. So that's
Great.
my job.
Thank you. Amy.
Okay. My name is Amy Lillis. I'm the chief of the political and economic section at the U.S. Embassy. And my job is to help us as partners and allies, the two countries, move forward on our shared interests in the region and the world. And that certainly includes trade as well.
Please, Mislav, we don't know who you are.
So my name is Mislav. I'm founder of, it says Mindsmiths. It's not, like thank you, Ratko. And president of Croatian AI Association. So I think that you cannot build a great company without actually building an ecosystem around yourself. And that's why I'm also very, very eager to talk about these topics.
Great, thank you. Ratko.
And I'm Ratko. I'm the digital natives lead for Central Eastern Europe in Microsoft, which is basically working with the late stage startups, unicorns, those guys building the ecosystem around this one and so forth. Also, as Mislav, being involved with Croai and artificial intelligence in this conference for quite a long time, I think. So, always happy to be here.
Thank you. During previous talks and discussions, we heard a lot of recipes today, for sure. And I want to continue that path. So, Ratko, I would like to start with you. Can you give us an example of initiatives with governments that you find personally impressive?
Yeah, okay. I have a favorite one, I
Okay.
can say. Unfortunately, it's not from Croatia.
Of course.
I spent quite a lot of time working with the guys in Estonia. So Estonian government, I mean, they're well known. Everybody talks about Estonia and so forth. What I like that actually, they said, look, the thing that we, let's say, sell or we are famous of is this, digital IP thing, platforms and so forth. So what is next for us? And quite logically, they said, we need to dive into artificial intelligence and how this works. So the government itself said, how we can support building the ecosystem, on the larger scale. And not just the one which is Estonian, but, we want to give the opportunity to basically anyone to kind of build something with us, right? So what they did, they actually spent some time thinking about what would be the AI platform for the government. So how they expose the data and services and so forth so that everybody can work on this one. And what I also like, they said, if we are going to build this, we cannot treat this as a government project. So it has to be more closely like how the enterprises would, or companies or startups would do this. So what they actually said, we need to go through the innovation type of procurement. And so suddenly you have a problem, which is actually a live problem for the government. You have first wave of, 50 to 60 startups who are trying to solve it in a best possible way by utilizing AI. And then the funnel goes into top 3 and then the top guy. And everybody's financed, right? So, every single entrant will get some money to actually build something. So it's not like we are building something because Mislav and myself, we think that would be a great idea to do. No. We are properly funded. Mm-hmm. And then we are utilizing the platform. We are also collaborating with the big guys like Microsoft. But when I say companies, I actually mean worldwide small startups or, grown-ups, growth-ups in the terms of, who can actually build that. I'm not talking about Microsoft or Oracle or AWS and these guys. We are just supporters. We are part of the platform. I love it because it scales amazingly, right? So currently Estonia has around, I hope I will not make a mistake here, but around 80 different AI-based services, which they are already published or they are getting to publish, to the citizens and to the organizations. And don't get me wrong, on top of this one is basically cognitive science, right? So cognitive bot, because what they believe is that the next user interaction between IT and citizens, right, should be via voice, right? Voice is the, so there's no forms, there's no even digital forms. Everything that you do by voice, right?
That's so cool.
Because that's how you utilize artificial intelligence in the first place. So they're betting on this one. This is why I like it, right? It's a big bet, it's interesting bet, and for them, if they succeed properly, they would have a next wave of innovation, and they will be again number one in whatever they do in the digital space.
That's so cool. That's actually a great example of how government, enterprises, startups work together. And how about UK? Do you have similar examples of that? Do you have some like national plans for AI? Can you tell us a bit more?
Thank you very much. Absolutely. I mean, first thing I'd just say that overall in the UK, the AI sector is buzzing, I would say. We're proud that we're number 3 in the world, and number 1 in Europe in terms of the UK being in the global ranking for AI. We've got about 1,500 companies already working in the AI space, and we've got centres of excellence around the country, including actually a number of representatives here today represented from them. So it's a very lively sector in the UK, and it's one of the reasons why it's really great to be here today, because of the thriving sector here in Croatia too, and I think there's lots for us to learn together. In terms of do we have an overall plan, yes, we have an AI plan which we came out with earlier on this year, which sets an overall framework for how we want to encourage a really flourishing AI sector. We also want to make sure that it is a fair AI sector, so that it benefits all bits of the economy, all different sectors, all different regions of the country, and also that we're using AI for issues that are of public benefit. So, for example, in the health sector, which we've been hearing brilliant stuff about already, also, for example, in energy efficiency, we see AI having a key role to play in autonomous vehicles. Those are just some of the examples where we're seeing AI. So there's a plan there, as well as having a flourishing sector. We want it to be fair, and also crucially, which we may come back to, I think making sure that the overall system has appropriate governance and regulation to make sure that the flip side that we heard in the very excellent first talk is addressed too. So we have that full framework.
We will definitely come back to the regulation. Amy, what is the situation in the US regarding AI? Do you have a national plan? Do you have a strategy?
Okay, well, we have. First of all, we're fully excited. We're very excited about the potential and knowledge that AI is going to be the driver of economic growth. It's going to be the driver of the directions we take with regard to how we defend ourselves, how we work, how we engage with others, and that's a reality that we're developing both economically, but also and on the market side, but also with regard to our rights, and as you'd stated, to make sure that it's fair. And so something that we just rolled out recently, in fact last week, was the AI Bill of Rights, and this is in line with EU initiatives and OECD initiatives to make sure that those who use AI and those who are affected by AI have their democratic rights and values protected through an established framework. Now, like most things we do in the United States, we tend not to have a top-down government-forced approach. It's much more trying to inculcate this approach within the private sector and make it a norm for engagement and for the building of the sector. And you'll see that as we discuss also more about financing. We tend to focus more on private sector financing for initiatives rather than government-funded grants for these, in part because we're not big fans of red tape, and we know that that gets in the way of development and initiative, which is what AI really needs at this point.
I love that you mentioned the red tape. Mislav already smiled.
Yeah. Now I would start with something like last night I was like a part of the panel where everybody like constantly agreed, and then it was just so boring. So I'll maybe like try with what I disagree. I just think that there's like no plan. Like no one has a plan. I don't even think Estonia has a plan. US doesn't have a plan. UK, I've been to Brussels. I would say no one has a plan. It looks like there is a plan, but if you start to dig deeper, if you actually start to think like, is this happening? Is this like causing all these positive effects? Or which is like the consequence of the positive effects that are happening in community, and it's just basically stating the obvious. I think that, for example, like Ratko's example about Estonia, that didn't start with the government being super smart and saying, oh, we have this strategy and then we'll spend this money and so on. It started because there was like a live community of like successful people who built some success, and then it started to be important to the voters, and when it started to be important to the voters, then basically also the politics started to play that game. And why I'm saying that? Because when I'm thinking in context of Croatia or in context of EU, I'm always thinking like where to focus our efforts. Should we focus our efforts on like writing better regulation, writing better, like creating better initiatives and so on, or we should focus on something else? And I really don't think that anybody really has a plan. It's just more, it just emerges like it's, in the end it sounds like there's a plan, but there was nothing in the beginning. It just happened by itself.
Ratko wanted
Yeah,
to
I just
add.
wanted to comment.
Yeah, please, Ratko.
Yeah, I mean, to start to disagree, no, it's not. I mean, actually, the government has a plan to experiment. Right? It's not like a solid plan. They just said like, I mean, we are not going to solve this by, prescribing everything because we have no clue, right? But the idea was, and then this goes into, let's not overplan because we have no clue. That the better thing is like, let's kind of think about, what is the experimentation landscape, right? And like how we engage others and see what is the best thing to actually build or to learn. And it goes, I think, along many things that we discussed, right, around.
Would you say that it happened, like what happened before? Like, did it, like, was there already like a success in digitalization, for example, in Estonia? And then the government just said, oh, it's important to voters, let's also like start like playing that game? Or it was vice versa? Like people are saying there are some smart people in the government, Estonian government, saying, you know what, let's create a plan how to make this like a very successful country, and then we'll impose that onto the public.
Yeah, it's such a bad example of, I mean, Estonia being different than a bunch of other countries, right? And actually both things happened, right? So in that country, and then we probably should stop around this one, right? It's, the good thing is that they, working for, like with some of the, comparing to some of the countries, working for the government on the projects like this one, that's a challenge, and that's also something that people wants to do, right? The like top people that you are mentioning, people successful from the private sector and so forth, actually going to the government and taking these roles and leads because they think it's important. So what happened is that people, citizens and organizations, like they actually think or they believe that the government is going into the right direction because the government, they know those guys, right? I mean, but it's a small country. It's like, 3 million people. Like it's a little bit different than big ones like US or UK, right? Where the different challenges, I think. So, but you were asking for the good example, and I took this one.
Okay, but we obviously sometimes need a plan because, like 2 years ago, when European Commission started, actually, when we saw the white paper about AI, everybody was really scared, really afraid. Everybody wanted to leave the European Union and to move to US to open the AI startup. But now, Amy, we can see that actually US is trying to regulate artificial intelligence through the AI Bills of Rights.
Yeah, I think that we have, I would agree with you. We don't have a plan. We have the acknowledgement that there needs to be a framework to allow for innovative work that isn't constrained but does fall within safeguards that allows for the protection of rights and make sure that the consumer and those affected, so not always the consumer but certainly those affected as we all are, have their rights protected within the framework that represents our values, certainly. And so I would argue that plans. So we've seen plans in the United States developed for addressing social media and things of that sort of precursors to what we understand as the AI world right now. Those tended to be reactionary, saying, oh my goodness, there's something happening, we need to have people, a government entity to address, to react, to develop a system. And I think at this stage, we're trying to be more proactive, and we've seen that both in our domestic stage, but also internationally with efforts to do so. And that's not to plan, but to provide guidelines. So.
Okay, Chris. Yeah.
Yeah, I very much resonate. If you want a disagreement or agreement on a panel, that as a typical civil servant, I want a nice balance of. I want to first of all half agree that, of course, a lot of the development and the initiative and the drive for AI is not going to come from government. It is from. It's one of the really exciting things I think about the AI sector and the digital sector in general is that it's very democratic, if you like. It's coming from all sorts of people in all sorts of ways, and it's not government's role to set out exactly what's going to happen, what are going to be the products, how is that going to work out. That is not what government can do. But I do think that it is really important that government does set, as you say, I mean, the framework that within which we can see AI develop. And I would say that we have a plan in that sense. We're clear about overall goals, about wanting to see this as a sector that really grows and flourishes. We have a very strong ambition for the UK to be a superpower in AI over the coming years, and then setting out those basic principles so that we ensure that there is a sort of proportionate but adaptable regulation for the AI sector is really important, and that we make sure that there is the trust and the confidence that consumers can have with AI, that they know that their rights are going to be protected and so forth, and that is really important. So I think, do we have a plan in terms of setting out every little detail of what's going to happen?
No.
Absolutely not, and thank goodness, because we get it wrong. But do we have a plan in terms of having an overall vision, having a sense of what are the areas where government can play a real role in enabling the sector to develop and ensuring that consumers are protected? Yes, we do, and we want to do it in a way then that can evolve as the technology develops. So I think it's about a balance of government playing the role that it can play as part of the overall ecosystem.
So, Mislav, do you have anything to add now?
I would say like 3 years ago when we actually started the association, we thought like all these things that you said, that they're like very important. And I was like, always like very inspired by Silicon Valley. I was like spent a lot of time there, and then I spent some time in Berlin, and then I was like, wow, could we actually copy some of these things here? And then you start thinking, and you're actually not starting from the beginning, you start from what you see, and then you want to copy that. But then even there, I wouldn't say it started with regulation. Even there, it didn't start with any kind of like a framework that you would actually use. It started with people. And then maybe out of that, like there's like the art of like stating the obvious. You just use some of the best norms and put it down into some kind of regulation. And then, but we were thinking like, oh, we need to get involved with the AI Act. AI Act could actually make Europe either a good place for doing AI businesses or a bad place for doing AI businesses. And in the first year, we were all afraid of like what's going to happen. And we were like very involved. We were writing like really good proposals. They were just saying, wow, you're so smart, it makes sense. Right now, after 3 years, I would just say, oh, such a waste of time. Why? Because no AI Act will actually make even UK or Croatia like a better place to start a startup. It won't actually even make it worse. Even if you actually make a bad regulation and it really goes against the market, it won't actually be implemented in the end. So like a lot of these things, I just hear it like in my head right now as an entrepreneur, they just sound like this, like blah, 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 blah. It just sounds like politics. And then I'm thinking like, but like, what's concrete? Like, what can I use? What can I actually leverage in my business? Like, why should I move to London? I would just say I'll move to London. Why? Because of the ecosystem, not because of the regulation. Right now, it's very hard to regulate anything around AI because there's just like not enough data, not enough good practices. So I'm more for this like US approach where basically you're just like sitting aside a little bit, like watching what's going on and so on, and not like getting too much in the discussion until you'll find patterns.
I can certainly
Yeah.
agree on the idea of you moving to London. That is something I very much recommend. Though actually in the UK it's much more than London. It's one of the interesting things is throughout the whole of the sector. I guess I completely agree. The ecosystem is fundamental, and I think it's one of the reasons why in the UK we think it is a very attractive place to invest. Is because of the overall ecosystem. Some of that is due to things that the government can help with. And I do think that in terms of having that sort of stable and predictable regulation, an open economy, making sure that we're investing in skills, that we're supporting a broad and deep university sector, enabling some of the overall infrastructure. Those are things which government can help. Equally, I completely agree that a lot of the reasons why the UK and other places are attractive is also down to the fact that it is there's a sort of culture of innovation, there's space for companies, there's space for academics to come up with their own ideas, and that I think is certainly how in the UK we try to get that balance. So let government do what it can do, but also not get in the way of where businesses and individuals can really flourish. So I think it's very much a sort of partnership approach that makes it very attractive.
So everybody was like mentioning government being on side. Do you, Ratko, think that's even possible in European countries to like just put governments on side and we will do our own business? We don't care about you.
No, I mean, that's completely impossible, right? I mean, you see the F word, I mean, the future just went down. Like when we started to talk about these things. Anyway. Now, the part of the problem is the future itself is going into more regulated, more controlled, whatever we think about this one, right? Just because the things are interconnected. So AI Act, for example, can be very proactive and open and everything, but then you have Data Act or data governance, so these things which are kind of protecting and limiting, for example, data transfers, right? So you bet on as a startup, as Mislav, you bet on the global things, right? You want to build something which scales and goes around, and then you have to train your model basically on the data which is available, and that's basically, I don't know, some data that you can fetch somewhere. If you're a company from outside of European Union, you have a big problem, right? Because then you cannot get the data, you cannot achieve the data transfer so that you can trade the algorithms in a better way. Why? Because the law doesn't allow you to do that, right? So the potential problem that we have today. It works for everybody in the same way because the regulation itself is limiting the transfer, right? So you cannot actually do that. For US and the European Union is having this huge debate around next version of Privacy Shield, how we can effectively move the data around the world, protecting the data, but we don't have all the protecting mechanisms in every single piece of the corner of the world, right? So what is the common layer for all of us, right? US is having one approach to this one, European Union another one, and currently we are in a big debate around this one, right? Like how to build this. That limits the entrepreneurship, like what you can really do around, right? So effectively, I think 85% of European data transfers belongs to the social networks, right? The big guys, right? So can you imagine saying like, well, the data cannot leave the country or cannot leave the European Union? Suddenly you don't have like a bunch of stuff, right? Like Facebook doesn't work, you know what I mean? Or TikTok or whatever, like it's done, right? It doesn't work for you because the data needs to go somewhere and it cannot by the law, right? So these things are, in the terms of collaborating with the governments, I think everybody needs to push forward and say like, yeah, we understand we need to build services in a better way so that they protect the data and do everything that you expect, but please also listen to us. Economic development and the ability to grow and develop things and so forth, right? I mean, you cannot, build 160 data centers around the world, being a Mindsmith, just because you want to actually be present everywhere and not to transfer the data, by the way, right? It's very hard, so it's very limiting.
But we are always quite loud when it comes to new regulations. It was same when GDPR was on. But Mislav, do you really believe that AI Act will have such a huge impact on AI startups?
No, I think it won't have like any effect. Like it will have effect on like a bigger companies, but on startups, you just don't need to care about it. Like you as a startup, if you won't be able to do it here, you'll do it somewhere else. And I think when I say somewhere else, and for example, we talk about UK, I'll still say London. If we talk about US, I'll still say there are few hubs there where you'll actually go. It's not the whole country. It's very similar like in EU. You need like the ecosystem. It's really not about the regulation. It's about like finding a first client, it's finding partners, it's actually basic testing something, it's recruiting talent and so on. And that's something that you can do only in like few places in the world on a bigger scale. And you can do it like very efficiently there so that you can just say, it's my competitive advantage. And AI Act is important, but it's important on the scale of like next 5 years or next 10 years. And very often you as a startup, you're just not thinking about I should start investing a lot of my time right now because in 5 years it will cost me money.
I have a question for you.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, of course.
Here, because I'm not an expert in AI. I'm curious about whether or not the virtual world that we are increasingly living in, that COVID has expedited, is that affecting the ecosystem and what it looks like? Is it now no longer a physical ecosystem? You'd mentioned there are only a few places in the US, for example, or in London. Is that changing now that you can recruit from anywhere and you don't necessarily need to be in the same physical spot for these initiatives?
So you'll always, like there are some things in your company and we call it like duct taping. So things when you're duct taping, that's what you want to have like in-house. These are the people that you want to have like close to yourself. You want to spend time with them like in real life. Things that are well defined, you can outsource that. And you can actually do it like completely online. So that's fine. But basically what you want a mentor, you want a partner, you want an investor, you want like top talent and so on. And you don't want to travel all around the world to do like few interviews. You basically want to find that in one place. You want like critical mass of these people in one place. And that's where things really start happening. And just to say that I don't think that you can actually, I really don't think that you can actually build a great company without actually talking about regulation, without talking with the public about what you're trying to achieve, getting public on board so that when public says like, this is something that we want to support, then the regulation will also support that. And if you don't learn how to communicate with public about what you're trying to build, then in the moment when that you think that you succeeded, then you will maybe actually get a hit and someone will forbid basically what you're doing.
No more questions. Like Mislav said, when you're creating a company or a startup, regulation is quite important, but funding is also. So I'm really interested in what happened in UK after the Brexit. So are you still like rely on VC funds and European funds? Not anymore European funds, but what's going on in UK right now?
Sure. So I'd say really well, first of all, overall in terms of the journey we've been on through the last sort of couple of years and after Brexit, it's one fact that I think isn't often well known, but it's really exciting, is actually that the UK's trade with the EU now is the highest it's ever been for the last 3 years. So we've, of course, the last 3 months. So yes, it's been for all sorts of reasons. Let's face it, the last 2-3 years have been challenging with COVID and with the overall economic situation. But the overall trade, UK, Europe is in a good place and growing, which is excellent. I'd say on the specific thing on finance, we provide finance, I'd say, in sort of three broad ways I would underline on the UK side. I mean, first is, of course, the UK is a major financial centre, huge venture capital funding. So, for example, £7 billion worth of funding, I think, has been provided to the AI sector, and it's a very, very dynamic market from that in the private sector. I'd also say from the public sector, we've got significant investment in this area. So it's been sort of over 2 billion invested over the last about 8 years. And we recently had a sort of sector deal for the AI sector. We're trying to facilitate £1 billion worth of input into that sector, and in particular areas. So, for example, the NHS, where there's a big AI project, about 250 million. So there's lots of direct government money coming through. And then, so thirdly, which is not sort of specifically on AI, but I do think it is really important, is back to the ecosystem point, is the funding that is provided for research institutions, for skills, for infrastructure, which all really help ensure that the UK is a highly attractive destination. So there's lots of finance. I heard a lot of people from the financial side saying the problem is not any lack of finance. The problem is identifying where you're going to use that and what are the best projects. But there's plenty of money there ready to be invested, which is good.
Amy, what about US?
I would say it's similar to the UK, certainly, possibly with a bit more focus on the venture capitalism and private sector investment, and also certainly with a focus on the public side in defense investment with AI specifically. But there are also local efforts, and this is something I think is possibly a bit more unique to the US, is that we can't have overarching federal regulations that impact at the local level without buy-in, certainly in the Senate and in Congress, basically. And that means that there will be the limited federal funding will likely go to defense initiatives, et cetera. But at the local level, there's also funding available for startups, trying to make the environment more attractive, to develop this ecosystem necessary. And you'll see that now, especially in more rural areas in the United States, which are not Silicon Valley, but are trying to attract people from Silicon Valley because of the cost of living, because of the ease of living, because certainly San Francisco is not where you want to be right now if you're just starting up. And so trying to create these unique spaces across the country is much more of a local government initiative. And you'll see then smaller amounts of funding available at that level too.
And is it complicated for a European startup to move to Miami or San Francisco? What is the process? Is that something you would advise or not, to open an office?
Of course I'd recommend it, but I don't know that I can speak to it exactly.
Okay.
A really good step is to go from
to
Europe to UK and then grow and then be a second step.
Of course.
But I'm unbiased, of course.
But are there any new trends in funding, Mislav and Ratko?
Yeah, just a comment. Yes, I mean, it's more like structural change. Right? So last year for Central Eastern Europe, which I'm covering in depth, I think that was like record-breaking in terms of the investments, of course.
Exactly.
Now, what we see this year, for the good reasons, and you know them, like in recession, inflation situation, and so forth, VCs are trying to diversify a little bit more than before. So it's getting harder to get the investments in the range of or north of 250 million, so Series CD type of investments, and it's kind of diversified into pre-seed, seed, Series A type of. So it's fairly easy. I don't want to say it's fairly, but it's easier to get the money if you are like a early growth type of seed startup. Then if you already received some of the investments and now you want to expand, right? And this is the trend for a huge trend for this year. Now the good thing around Central Eastern Europe that the number of unicorns or number of the big guys in Central Eastern Europe is quite small comparing to some other regions, right? So we don't feel that much pressure. Actually, we feel that there is even more money coming into the region just because, as Amy said, like maybe they're shifting the money somewhere else where they can get human capital or like ease of living. So Croatia is also a good place to invest, right? Just to continue, but anyway, a number of others. So this is what we see for this year, and I believe that will be the outcome of the full calendar year at the end, right? So smaller ones. Yeah.
Cool. Mislav, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I think like next year or two will be actually good for European startups. Why? Because the way how the money is being deployed right now, it's like shifting a little bit. Before it was more about like this US way, which is more about the story. There's a new trend. Like we don't want to talk about revenue or profits or whatever. Why? Because then it becomes real. It's better to talk about magic. And it worked like really well for years. And in Europe, it was like the opposite. And I would say it was like terrible to me, it was awful. Why? Because a lot of European VCs are actually part of the money they get from the union, and because of that, they have a lot of constraints. And then basically they're not putting money into founders, they're not putting money into the vision, they're not really supporting what maybe their gut feeling is telling them, support this because this could be huge. And I would say that we missed a lot of great opportunities because of that. And because of that, you'll just go to some US investors and they'll just love you as a person, they'll love your vision, and they'll support you. And you'll just say, oh, it's so much easier than here. But right now, with all this crisis and so on, there's a lot of money that needs to be deployed, but everybody's super careful right now. So they're just now starting to think about can you show me some financials? Can I see some traction? Is there some revenue? How are you burning your money and so on? And a lot of companies from Europe had to do it from the start. And it was slowing them down, really slowing them down. But right now, they could be very attractive for these first rounds. Later rounds, as Ratko said, it'll be hard. Why it will be hard? Because, I don't know, 2 years ago, people believed that maybe it's possible to build $100 trillion company, something like that. So valuations were just skyrocketing because no one wanted to know what's the ceiling. Right now, it's easier when you're starting. It's harder for later because you'll need to prove it with some numbers. So I would say this thing that we were suffering for years, at least 10, 15 years here in Europe, maybe it's our time that we actually shine.
Right. Thank you. So we talked about fundraising, cooperations, about policy, but one thing left in the next 5 minutes, it's the mentality. Amy, you have two perspectives, the US perspective and Croatian perspective regarding you're located in Zagreb. So what do you think we have to change, and do we have to change? What do we miss? So if you can share.
Okay. I like that question, first of all. I've been here for 2 months, so I can tell you and answer authoritatively everything that needs to be changed. No, what I do appreciate, and I've actually had the pleasure of meeting with some startups, some innovators, some incubators, really impressive people who defy what I think Americans often think of when they think of Eastern Europe and Central Europe. There's creativity, there's a willingness to think beyond the circumstances in which they fall. There is an acknowledgement of the challenges, especially for funding, and laughing it off and continuing forward. That resilience is pretty amazing. And that's something that, as an American, I had been searching for here as well, because I think that it's part of who we are on the American side, is the creativity, the resilience, the moving forward, crossing the prairie regardless of how many tornadoes and storms come, that kind of approach to things. One thing I did hear from everyone with whom I've spoken on this topic is the frustration in applying for government and EU funds. The red tape, the process, in fact, some people choosing not to do it at all, and so that there's actually funding left on the table because it's just such a headache that it's easier to find in other ways. And that's unfortunate, and it speaks to a need to reform the process, certainly. The US side is much more about going out there and finding and sort of selling the vision, as you had mentioned, and knowing that there are people out there who are interested in investing in the vision with less red tape. And that's simply, as we see from the AI Bill of Rights and through the funding approach, the focus on making it easier to succeed, not imposing the government's approach or government hand tends to be our approach, and it's refreshing to see that that's embraced in many corners here as well.
Radical, thank you. Chris, what about you? When you not the comparison between Croatia and UK, but UK and EU mentality, can you see the difference?
Yeah, well, first of all, I should say on the Croatia side, if you've been here for 2 months, I've been here for 2 days, so I'm definitely going to give you a lecture. No, I won't give you a lecture on the Croatia side, but I would say that it's been, even from my visit here and last time I've been here, I totally agree what you say about the sort of the buzz and the dynamism and the number of people working here and elsewhere in the sector is hugely impressive. And then you can look at some of the large players like Infobip or Remats, who you might not necessarily think of as being in this sector, but actually I think some of the technological stuff they're doing is massively exciting. So completely agree on the opportunities here. I'd say on the UK and EU, in a whole range of ways, I think we have a very similar mindset. Both absolutely want to see this sector flourish. We absolutely see the importance of the fairness as well as the flourishing, which I talked about before. So its fundamental values, I think, are very much the same. Inevitably, on some of the detail, we take slightly different approaches, which I think is actually healthy and right that we look at different approaches. So, for example, in the UK system, rather than having one sort of central body looking at EI regulation, we're going for more of an approach of getting different bits of the regulatory system to operate. But we absolutely see this as an area, like many, where we can work together. I love the comment in the first speaker saying this is not a race in the sense that we're, one person wins and one person loses. This is something that we all work together, and it's such a rapidly fluid environment that it flourishes best where we're all learning from each other. So see it really as while we may take slightly different approaches on some of the detail, the fundamental principle of what we're doing, and trying to do this as a not just UK EU but UK EU US global effort, I think is key to our success.
I understand. So, and Ratko, what do you think are our next steps in creating that ecosystem, that positive ecosystem?
Yeah, because this is the panel a little bit about the government, right? So, folks, I think in a way that startups and companies here, and basically everybody fights for human capital, right? I mean, that's a big challenge. I hope the government will figure it out that fight for the businesses and startups is this equal task, right? So, because IT is so movable, people just go wherever, right? And that I think that structural change needs to happen. And I'll just finish with the example which I see, at least in my family. Like my older guy, he's studying artificial intelligence in Holland, right? No connections to me doing stuff, but anyway. And it's amazing how the university and government tries to pull them into the ecosystem from the day one, right? I mean, he just started, right? And one of the things that they have as a task on the university is to form a startup, right? So through the startup, they are actually doing the exercises, and then university connects them to another companies, and they're trying everything to keep the human capital over there, right? And this is something that I think we don't do properly, right? I mean, understanding that it's very movable, right? It's like Mislav can go and do UK, US easily. But still, creating the ecosystem, that's very much something that he wants to find, right? Yeah. With all other things like, okay, we have a sea and it's warm and you can swim here, it's fun, great parties, and then there's some other things that we need to build. So something very structural needs to happen in a way how we think about keeping this and developing these companies and then building on that innovation potential that these guys have, right? But yeah, it's not even work in progress, I think. Right? So I'll stop there.
I know. Mislav?
I'll just say that I was really offended by this question. Why? Because it just implied that there's like some super cool mentality in US or UK that maybe we don't have and so on. And I just don't think that's correct. I would say that they have hubs. And in those hubs, you have like critical mass of people who created like ecosystem with like super cool mentality. If you go out of these hubs, you see what you see like anywhere else in the world. Like last night in this panel, it was like one of the questions was, Frankfurt is so cool, like we have everything in Frankfurt, we have money, we have companies and so on. Why are our people going to Berlin? Because Berlin has this cool hub of people that created a critical mass, and if you want to build something cool, you'll go there to spend it with people. Everything's so quicker there. So it's not about like, oh, are Germans doing something wrong or something right? Are US doing something wrong? Is Croatia doing something wrong? It's like, can we build our own hub? Can we actually create the critical mass of people who share ideas, who are not defeated, like life didn't defeat them so far. They want to build something, they'll help each other how to do it. And we then have all the tools how to do it. So if I go to US, I don't feel that I'm like, that I worth less because I'm from Croatia. I can just maybe say like, wow, if I lived my whole life in San Francisco, maybe I would do something quicker and faster. Maybe I would find better mentors easier than I can do it actually here. And I just think it's our responsibility to just recognize that it's not like about your DNA, it's about your actions, and are we going to do something about it or not?
I agree. That's the whole point of Croai. Sorry.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think the conclusion from your comment is that we all have a super cool mentality, and
Absolutely.
that's a very happy thought.
So thank you, guys. We don't have any more time for questions, so leave them for the break. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you.